The Curious Case of the Missing Manuscript, a Miss Marple Mystery. Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins with a manuscript, unfinished and unpublished, kept safely in a quiet village study until the morning it vanished without a trace. It was said the pages held more than a simple story, carrying secrets, names, and truths someone never intended to see the light of day. The disappearance is brushed off as carelessness, yet Miss Marple immediately senses something far more deliberate at work. As whispers spread through the village and old tensions resurface, it becomes clear that whoever took the manuscript was not interested in stealing a book, but in silencing the past itself. Because in St. Mary Mead, words can be as dangerous as weapons, and some stories are worth killing to keep hidden. Before we turn the first page of this unsettling mystery, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple stories on Haunting Vales. Chapter 1: The Curious Case of the Missing Manuscript. The trouble in St. Meadows did not begin with shouting, nor with the drama of a slammed door or raised voices. It began, quietly, as such things often do, with absence. A space on a shelf where something important had once rested. A silence where certainty should have been. Miss Jane Marple noticed it first, though no one would have guessed it at the time. She was seated by the window of her small sitting room, the afternoon light falling softly across her knitting. Outside, the village green lay peaceful and orderly, the way St. Meadows liked to present itself to the world. A pair of sparrows hopped along the low stone wall. Mrs. Hawthorne's cat dozed in the sun, tail flicking lazily. Everything appeared precisely as it should be. Yet Miss Marple's needles paused. She frowned slightly, not at her knitting, but at a memory that refused to settle. Something had shifted in the village, just a fraction, like a picture hanging ever so slightly crooked. Most people would have missed it entirely. Miss Marple never did. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, hurried sound, impatient in its urgency. Miss Marple set aside her knitting with care, rose, and went to the door. On the step stood Clara Whitcombe, her cheeks flushed, her hat askew, gloved hands twisting together with visible distress. Clara was not a woman given to exaggeration. She was, in fact, known for her composure, her orderly habits, and her devotion to routine. To see her thus unsettled was, in itself, alarming. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice tight, "I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I don't know who else to turn to." Miss Marple stepped aside at once. "My dear Clara, do come in. You look as though the ground has given way beneath your feet." Clara entered the sitting room, glancing about as if half expecting something else to have gone missing. She perched on the edge of the chair Miss Marple offered, her posture stiff. "It's gone," Clara said. Miss Marple poured tea. She did not ask what had gone. Experience had taught her that the truth revealed itself more readily when allowed to unfold in its own time. "The manuscript," Clara continued, her voice dropping. "My uncle's manuscript. It has vanished." Miss Marple handed her a cup. "Take a sip first, my dear. Shock makes the tongue run ahead of the mind." Clara obeyed, though her hands trembled. It was there last night. "I checked. I always check. This morning, when I went to the study, the drawer was empty." Miss Marple sat opposite her, folding her hands. "And this manuscript, I take it, was no ordinary bundle of pages. Clara let out a short, humorless laugh. It was everything. My Uncle Arthur's life's work. 40 years of research, notes, revisions. A complete history of St. Meadows, from its earliest days to the present. Unpublished. Unshared. Unprotected, apparently. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained mild. History, she murmured. That is a powerful thing to lose. You don't understand, Clara said quickly. There were things in it. Names. Incidents. Events people would rather forget. My uncle believed the truth mattered more than comfort. Miss Marple nodded. Truth often makes enemies without intending to. Clara leaned forward. You must help me. If that manuscript is destroyed, or altered, or falls into the wrong hands, the consequences could be dreadful. Miss Marple smiled gently. Let us not borrow trouble before it arrives. Tell me first, who knew of the manuscript's existence? Clara hesitated. More people than I would like. My uncle was careless with his trust. He spoke too freely. Miss Marple set her teacup down. Carelessness with trust, she said softly, has undone more than one good soul. Arthur Whitcombe had died 6 months earlier, peacefully, in his sleep. A respected historian, a quiet man with sharp eyes and a sharper memory, he had devoted himself to chronicling the village he loved. Clara, his niece and sole heir, had returned to St. Meadows to settle his affairs and preserve his work. Preserve it, until now. By late afternoon, Miss Marple found herself walking toward Whitcombe House, a tall, narrow building set slightly apart from the village centre. Its windows stared outward like watchful eyes. The door was answered by Clara, who looked marginally calmer but no less troubled. The study lay at the back of the house. It smelled faintly of dust and old paper, of ink and time. Bookshelves lined the walls, crowded with volumes arranged in meticulous order. Miss Marple's gaze moved at once to the writing desk. The drawer, Clara said, pointing. That one. Miss Marple approached slowly. She did not touch it. Instead, she observed. The desk was old, but well cared for. No scratches, no signs of forced entry. The drawer slid open easily, revealing nothing but a few loose sheets and a pencil. You see, Clara said. Gone. Yes, Miss Marple replied. Gone, but not taken in haste. Clara blinked. What do you mean? A thief in a hurry leaves chaos behind, Miss Marple said. This desk is too neat. Whoever removed the manuscript knew exactly what they were doing, and had time to do it. She crossed the room, her eyes lingering on the shelves. Your uncle's habits were consistent, were they not? Yes, Clara said. He was precise to the point of obsession. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Such people leave patterns behind. And patterns, once disturbed, speak very loudly. She turned to the window. Who visited your uncle in his final months? Clara sighed. Too many. Reverend Collins came often, always asking about certain parish records. Mrs. Bell from the Historical Society wanted early drafts. Thomas Green, the council clerk, was very interested in land disputes mentioned in the later chapters. And then there was Edmund Blake. Miss Marple's gaze returned to her. Ah. Edmund Blake. You know him, Clara said. I know of him, Miss Marple replied. A man who smiles with his mouth but not his eyes. Clara looked away. He offered to publish the manuscript. Uncle refused. He said Edmund cared more for profit than accuracy. Miss Marple nodded. That alone might be motive enough, though motive is a slippery thing. They were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hall. Reverend Collins appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully composed. Miss Marple, he said, inclining his head. I heard you were here. So observant, Miss Marple replied pleasantly. You must have heard quite a lot lately. The Reverend's lips tightened. Arthur's work is important to the village. Its disappearance concerns us all. Does it? Miss Marple said. Or does it concern some more than others? Reverend Collins met her gaze steadily. Truth should uplift, not wound. A comforting belief, Miss Marple said. History, however, does not always share our desire to be comforted. He excused himself shortly thereafter, leaving behind a faint sense of unease. As dusk fell, Miss Marple walked home slowly. The village lights flickered on, one by one. Doors closed. Curtains were drawn. She thought of Arthur Whitcombe, hunched over his desk late at night, writing by lamplight. She thought of secrets preserved in ink, waiting patiently for the moment they might be revealed. A missing manuscript was not merely a theft. It was a silence imposed, a voice stilled. And Miss Marple knew, with quiet certainty, that someone in St. Meadows was very afraid of what that voice might say. The first move had been made. The game, whether the village realized it or not, had begun. Chapter 2: Shadows Cast by the Lost Manuscript. Miss Marple slept poorly that night, not because of fear, but because of thought. Her mind, once set upon a problem, had a way of turning it over and over, examining each edge, each corner, until the shape beneath became clear. The missing manuscript was not merely an object taken. It was a disturbance, a deliberate act that had unsettled the village in ways most of its residents did not yet fully understand. By morning, St. Meadows had begun to whisper. Miss Marple heard it first at the post office. She stood patiently in line, her parcel tucked under one arm, listening as voices rose and fell around her. Words drifted through the air, unfinished sentences, lowered tones, glances cast over shoulders. Arthur Whitcombe's papers, gone just like that, one woman murmured. They say there were names in it, another replied. Names that ought never to be written down. Miss Marple said nothing. She paid for her stamps, thanked the clerk, and stepped back into the street, the chill air sharpening her senses. Gossip, she knew, was a powerful thing. It could illuminate the truth, or bury it deeper than any locked drawer. Her next stop was the church. Reverend Collins was arranging flowers near the altar when Miss Marple entered. He looked up, surprise flickering briefly across his face before settling into polite warmth. Miss Marple, he said. What a pleasure. Is it? She replied gently. I was hoping we might have a word. Of course, he said, gesturing toward a pew. "About Arthur, I presume?" "Yes," Miss Marple said, seating herself. "And about his manuscript?" Reverend Collins folded his hands. "A regrettable loss. Arthur meant well, but some truths are better guided, presented with care." Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. "Care," she said. "Or control?" The Reverend stiffened almost imperceptibly. "The village has a reputation to uphold." "So do individuals," Miss Marple replied. "And reputations often suffer most when they are defended too vigorously." There was a pause. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. "You visited Arthur frequently," Miss Marple continued. "Did he ever confide in you about concerns for his safety or his work?" Reverend Collins hesitated. He was worried. Not for himself, but for the unrest his writing might cause. He feared the past would reopen wounds. "Wounds," Miss Marple said softly, "do not heal by pretending they never existed." She rose, thanking him for his time. As she left, she felt his eyes upon her back, thoughtful, troubled. From the church, Miss Marple walked toward the village green, where Thomas Green, the council clerk, was supervising the trimming of hedges. He was a stout man with a tendency to sweat under pressure, though the morning was cool. "Mr. Green," Miss Marple said, approaching him. "A word, if you please." He smiled nervously. "Always happy to talk, Miss Marple. I understand you had an interest in Arthur Whitcombe's later chapters," she said. Mr. Green's smile faltered. "Professional interest only. Land records, boundary disputes, that sort of thing." "Disputes can become very personal," Miss Marple said. "Especially when property, or pride, is involved." Mr. Green wiped his brow. Arthur was mistaken about some things. Outdated sources. Were they? Miss Marple asked. Or merely inconvenient? He bristled. "Are you suggesting I took the manuscript?" "I am suggesting nothing," Miss Marple said calmly. "I am listening." Mr. Green muttered something about meetings and excused himself, walking away with hurried steps. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders. By midday, the village felt tighter, as though it were holding its breath. Miss Marple called next upon Mrs. Bell of the Historical Society, who lived in a tidy cottage filled with labeled boxes and framed certificates. Mrs. Bell welcomed her enthusiastically, though her cheer seemed forced. "It's dreadful," Mrs. Bell said, pouring tea. "Absolutely dreadful. Arthur's work was invaluable." "You wish to see it published," Miss Marple said. "Of course," Mrs. Bell replied quickly. "With revisions, naturally. Some sections were rather, well, sensitive." Miss Marple sipped her tea. "Sensitivity," she said, "is often another word for discomfort." Mrs. Bell laughed too loudly. "We must think of the village as a whole." "And yet," Miss Marple said, "you did not report the manuscript missing until Clara did." Mrs. Bell flushed. "I assumed she had moved it." Miss Marple smiled. "Assumptions have a way of leading us astray." As the afternoon wore on, Miss Marple's thoughts returned again and again to one name: Edmund Blake. She found him at his office on the edge of the village, a modern building that stood in quiet defiance of St. Meadow's older charm. He rose as she entered, his smile smooth and practiced. "Miss Marple," he said. "To what do I owe this honor?" "I was hoping you might enlighten me," she replied, taking a seat. "About Arthur Whitcombe's manuscript." Edmund clasped his hands. "A tragedy. Truly. A work of such potential." "Potential for whom?" Miss Marple asked. "For everyone," he said easily. "History deserves an audience." Arthur disagreed, Miss Marple said. He felt accuracy mattered more than appeal. Edmund's eyes hardened briefly. "Accuracy can be shaped." "Truth resists shaping," Miss Marple said. "That is what makes it so troublesome." She watched him carefully. His posture was relaxed, but his fingers tapped against the desk, betraying impatience. "Did you visit Arthur shortly before his death?" she asked. "Yes," Edmund replied. "We discussed terms." "He refused." "His choice." "And you accepted it," Miss Marple said. Edmund smiled. "I accept many disappointments." Miss Marple rose. "Disappointment," she said, "has driven greater acts than theft." As evening fell, Miss Marple returned to Whitcombe House. Clara met her in the study, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "I've been thinking," Clara said, "about the night Uncle died." Miss Marple looked at her sharply. "Go on." "He was restless," Clara said. "He locked the study door before bed, something he rarely did." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the door. "And the key?" "Missing," Clara said quietly. "I assumed it had been misplaced." Miss Marple closed her eyes for a moment. "Or taken." A locked door suggested privacy. "Or protection." They searched the study again, this time with purpose. Miss Marple examined the carpet, the skirting boards, the edges of shelves. Near the fireplace, she noticed a faint scrape on the floor. "Has this chair always been here?" she asked. Clara frowned. "No. Uncle kept it against the wall." Miss Marple moved it aside. Beneath it, barely visible, was a loose floorboard. With care, they lifted it. Inside lay a narrow space, empty now, but dustless. The manuscript was hidden, Clara whispered. "And someone knew where to look," Miss Marple replied. The truth was taking shape now, slow and steady. Arthur Whitcombe had feared something. Or someone. He had hidden his work, locked his study, and yet, it had still been taken. Miss Marple straightened, her expression resolute. "This was no crime of opportunity," she said. "It was planned. Patient. Personal." Outside, the church bell rang the hour. Its sound echoed through the village, solemn and inescapable. Someone in St. Meadow's had silenced the past. But Miss Marple knew, with absolute certainty, that the past had a way of making itself heard. Chapter 3: The Truth Buried in the Missing Manuscript. Morning settled over St. Meadow's with deceptive calm. The sky was pale and open, the kind that suggested nothing unpleasant could possibly occur beneath it. Miss Marple, however, knew better. Villages had a way of holding their breath, presenting an image of peace while quietly bracing for impact. She sat at her small kitchen table, hands folded around a cup of tea she had not yet touched. Her thoughts were steady now, no longer circling, no longer searching. The puzzle had resolved itself during the night, piece fitting into piece with the quiet certainty that came only when the truth was complete. The manuscript had not been taken for profit alone. It had been taken for fear. By late morning, Miss Marple walked once more toward Whitcombe House. Clara opened the door before she could knock, her face pale but alert, as though she sensed that something final had arrived. "You know," Clara said. It was not a question. "Yes," Miss Marple replied. "And so do you, though you may not yet have named it." They went into the study. Sunlight streamed across the desk, illuminating the empty drawer, the polished wood bearing silent witness to the trouble it had caused. Miss Marple stood very still, allowing the room to speak. "Your Uncle Arthur did not merely record events," she said at last. "He traced patterns. And those patterns led him somewhere dangerous." Clara lowered herself into a chair. "The fire at Mill Row," she whispered. Miss Marple nodded. 30 years ago. A fire declared accidental, though the evidence was thin even then. Arthur discovered altered parish accounts, redirected maintenance funds, and witness statements that were quietly adjusted after the fact. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. "People died." "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "And others were protected." She moved toward the window. Reverend Collins and Thomas Green were both involved in handling funds at the time. Young men, eager, respected, and deeply afraid of scandal. The truth would have destroyed them. "And Mrs. Bell," Clara said slowly. "A different kind of fear," Miss Marple replied. Her husband was the inspector who signed off on the final report. Arthur's notes would have exposed his deliberate omissions. Clara looked up sharply. Then it was Mrs. Bell who took the manuscript. "She moved it," Miss Marple said. "Not to destroy it, but to edit it." She knew Arthur kept copies of notes, but not the full draft. She believed she could remove the most damaging section and return the rest. Clara rose, pacing. "But it never came back." "No," Miss Marple said. "Because someone else learned where it was hidden." They heard footsteps in the hall. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Right on time." Reverend Collins arrived first, followed by Thomas Green, then Mrs. Bell, and finally Edmund Blake, his expression composed but watchful. Clara stood by the desk, tense but resolute. Miss Marple addressed them calmly, her voice clear and unhurried. "You are all here because you each had reason to fear Arthur Whitcombe's manuscript," she said. "But only one of you knew exactly where he hid his most sensitive work." Her gaze rested on Mrs. Bell. "You catalogued his papers," Miss Marple continued. "You noticed references to Mill Row that did not match the official history. You panicked. You removed the manuscript and hid it, intending to protect a reputation already built on silence." Mrs. Bell's face crumpled. "I only meant to remove those pages. I never intended for this to happen." "And then," Miss Marple said, turning slightly, "Edmund Blake learned of it. You saw opportunity where others saw danger." You took the manuscript from its hiding place, not to publish it, but to control those it exposed. Edmund laughed shortly. Control is a strong word. Truth has a way of resisting control, Miss Marple replied. That is why you kept it locked away. The village constable arrived soon after. The manuscript was recovered intact from a secure case in Edmund Blake's office, every page exactly as Arthur Whitcombe had written it. As the others were led away, Clara stood very still, her eyes shining with tears she did not attempt to hide. He knew, she said. Uncle knew it would come to this. Yes, Miss Marple said gently. And he trusted that someone would listen. That evening, Miss Marple returned to her cottage. She resumed her knitting as the light faded beyond the window, the village settling once more into quiet routines. St. Meadows would move on. Villages always did. But the past, once named, could no longer be buried so easily. Miss Marple made a small, thoughtful note to herself. Silence protects nothing forever. It merely delays the reckoning. And somewhere, Arthur Whitcombe's voice, preserved in ink, had finally been allowed to speak. If you enjoyed this Miss Marple mystery, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us which mystery you would like to hear next. Your support helps keep these classic stories alive, and more secrets are waiting to be uncovered.